one way to get to Tingle, Tingle, Tingle Nation. Sweet, sweet dreams. This is my life story, or at least part of it, and there are some issues and topics that could be dramatic or triggering for some people to hear, relating to alcoholism from family members and abuse that was endured. So I just want to give you a fair warning that this book does cover topics like that, but hopefully you'll find it inspiring and get tingles listening to the whispers. I have done lots of therapy and am proud that I was able to write my story in hopes that it will help lots of people to overcome whatever obstacles they face from their past or that they might be going through currently. With much love and gratitude, I share this with you. Thank you. Chapter 4 of My Life with Robin. I hope you get lots of tingles, 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 and I hope you're getting into the story. And if you fell asleep before the last one ended, or you missed something, just go to the playlist on my channel called My Book, and it has each of the chapters that I've posted. I love you and thank you for being interested in my story. So, on we go with My Life with Robin by me, Melissa Heavener. Chapter 4, Mary Bishop. Mary had the picture-perfect family life as far as Brenda could tell, and she would spend a great deal of time lamenting over why it was that Mary was lucky enough to have both a mother and a father who cared for her, and she, Brenda, got stuck with her alcoholic mother and a father who left. Mary's parents were Irish descent, and although they were both born and raised in Fredericksburg, Maryland, Rose, Mary's mother, was a brilliant, Barbie doll-looking teenage girl who had endless, long blonde hair and deep blue eyes. If you looked into her eyes, they had an instantly calming effect because it was like staring into a hidden window that opens to the ocean. She was the head cheerleader at the local high school, and Rose was known for being a brainiac as well. Therefore, it was not surprising the second Andrew Bishop saw Rose, he vowed to marry her. In the years following high school, the two had their first interaction when a divine cosmic equation worked out so that Rose was selected by Mr. Berman, the 10th grade biology teacher, to be Andrew's lab partner. And just like that, Mr. Berman became Andrew's second favorite teacher, only to be second to Miss Woodrick, the first-year English teacher just out of college, another nasty boy who's going to act as though he knows it all, and I am some piece of meat on his endless list of cheerleaders that he would like to. I don't even want to complete that thought. To Rose's delight, Andrew spoke a soft hello and quickly resumed listening to Mr. Perlman. Andrew, your lab partner will be Rose Peters. Andrew was very pleased with Mr. Perlman's lab partner choice for him, and he thanked the teacher over and over, silently to himself, not hearing a word the teacher said after his partner was assigned. It took all Andrew's strength not to jump up from his seat and scream, "All right!" Rose was impressed with Andrew's quiet, sophistication. She also liked that he was enthusiastic about science class. He had thick, light brown hair and gentle eyes that always made him appear as though he was deep in thought, even when he was not. Over the years, Rose and Andrew had ups and downs in their life together, but the most important thing between them was the love they shared, which was so consuming that it was as though they had been together for many lifetimes. In fact, they were married at the age of 18, right after their high school graduation, in spite of the numerous objections from various individuals who were told of their union plans. They were not fazed, because Rose and Andrew knew they were each other's destiny. They each felt as though their lives began when they first met. 6 years later, Rose Bishop carried their one and only child, Mary, who was born in the month of April 1956. For the most part, Mary had a great childhood. Rose carefully loved and guided her child to the best of her ability, and the love and support of her husband, Andrew. Andrew even worked 2 jobs so Rose could stay at home with the baby for the first 2 years of her life. Then, until Mary turned 2, the Bishops decided they wanted a bigger house. Even though Rose was thankful she found a husband with a great work ethic, she wanted to provide the world for her family. Rose knew it would take forever for them to afford a bigger house with just one of them working. However, Rose did not dare tell her husband about her desire to work, because he was still a young dad whose male ego was not tamed by life experiences, and he would take her desire to participate in the family's income as a subtle way of saying that he was not doing a good job as the breadwinner for the 3 of them. A few days before Rose made up her mind to tell her husband how she felt, she took Mary for a walk, hoping to help the baby become sleepy and take a nice long afternoon nap so she could prepare a lavish dinner for her hard-working husband before he was off to his night job. Of course, she also knew that a content husband with a full stomach was more agreeable, and she felt that after dinner would be the best time to broach the subject of her working. 7 blocks into the walk, Rose noticed a seamstress shop that had she was very good at it. The shop was cool as Rose entered, pushing a sleepy Mary in her stroller, who suddenly perked up as the cool air from the AC swept across her little face. Under normal circumstances, it would take a lot more than blowing AC to startle Mary shortly before she was going to drift off to her afternoon nap. But the shop was unfamiliar, and she had just started in the last couple of months to really take notice of strangers. The shop had 4 strangers in it who briefly looked up when Mary opened the shop door and jingled. That jingled as it opened because there was what looked like 4 sleigh bells hanging from the top of the door. The woman who was closest to the door, Mrs. McGinn, a white-haired lady who was in her mid-60s, moved like someone 20 years younger as she jumped up to greet Rose and Mary at the door. "How can I help you and your bundle of love today?" she asked with the most dazzling smile spreading across her face when she laid eyes on Mary. "Hello," Rose said, before taking a very deep breath, before she continued. "Well, I was wondering if you are looking to hire any more seamstresses, because if so, I'm interested in a position. I've been sewing since I was young." Almost as soon as she made this statement, Rose regretted it because of the wide-eyed look she had gotten from Mrs. McGinn that seemed to say, "Since you were young, what the heck are you now if not young? Do you have any examples of your work?" Mrs. McGinn inquired. The question had just fallen off her lips, and Rose replied with gusto that Mrs. McGinn liked. As Rose said, "Yes, I actually made the dress that I'm wearing today, as well as my daughter's outfit," she said with obvious pride. With that, Mrs. McGinn asked, "May I?" as she bent down to reach for the hem of Rose's dress so she could evaluate Rose's sewing. "Sure," replied Rose, while Mrs. McGinn lifted the edge of Rose's dress to see the stitching and the handmade hem. Then the other ladies in the shop briefly looked up from their work to see if it seemed like Mrs. McGinn was pleased with what she saw with the clothes. Mary began to fidget in her stroller until Mrs. McGinn said, "Can I pick the little dear up?" "Of course, thank you for asking," answered Rose. Mary planted the biggest smile on her face when Mrs. McGinn picked her up out of the stroller. Then Mrs. McGinn carried Mary over to the other 3 ladies, who nodded politely as Mrs. McGinn introduced each of them. "This tall, pretty lady is Mrs. Cooper," stated Mrs. McGinn, "but you and your mother can call me Sally," Miss Cooper said with a bow. "Then we have Miss Reading," continued Miss McGinn. Once her name was called, Miss Reading stood up and said, "Feel free to call me Grace." Then she quietly sat down at her sewing station. Finally, they walked over to where a little Oriental lady was sitting. "This is Mrs. Lee. She does not speak a lot of English, but she sure can sew very well," said Mrs. McKin. Then she walked over to the stroller, placed Mary back in, and welcomed Rose aboard, and asked when she could start. "Oh, whenever you would like," Rose answered with a smile. "How about tomorrow?" "Sounds good to me," said Mrs. McKin. For the next 3 years, Rose worked diligently at the sewing shop, while the other 3 ladies watched Mary. Tragically, 3 days after Mary's 5th birthday, Rose died of a brain aneurysm. Andrew was in complete shock over losing his wife and struggled to be a mother and father to Mary, and in order to overcome his sadness, he would drown himself in alcohol to drown the pain. Fortunately for Mary, the ladies in the seamstress shop were like surrogate mothers. One day, Rita decided that she would take a part-time job working in the sewing shop, and because the ladies were so used to caring for Mary, they welcomed Rita's daughter Brenda as a playmate for Mary. Over the years, Brenda and Mary became best friends who were more like sisters than friends, and they did everything together. In fact, Aunt Mabel, Aunt Blair, and Rita were extended family members to Mary. One day, Rita went out to lunch with Mary's father, Andrew, confessed to him that she was having marriage issues with her husband over the fact that he believed she had a problem with alcohol. Andrew was very supportive, though he did not tell her that he too thought she had a problem with alcohol. By the time Brenda was 12, she was practically living with Aunt Mabel and Aunt Blair because Rita was too busy nursing her alcohol habit. Shortly after turning 12, Brenda became a slave to whiskey. Shortly after turning 12, Brenda decided she was going to run away because her mother had become a slave to whiskey, and her father had abandoned the family because of his wife's affair with Jack Daniels. After several weeks of saving money, Mary and Brenda took a flight out to California. During this time, Newsweek had done a feature story explaining that many pre-teenagers were running away to sunny California during a pre-hippie movement in the early 60s. When the 2 girls arrived in Los Angeles, they had $30 in their pocket, and they took a bus from downtown LA to Santa Monica Beach. There they met a man named Ronnie, who was a self-proclaimed preacher. Ronnie was taking these children under his wing while they were camped out in self-contained tents. The girls were shocked at the thousands of kids that were residing on Santa Monica Beach under large blue tents at the mercy of a 33-year-old self-proclaimed saint, providing them with 50-cent hamburgers and donated Coca-Cola products. After 3 weeks, Mary declared that she wanted to go home. girls home. Aunt Mabel and Aunt Blair greeted them at the airport and were so relieved that their prayers had been answered as they found the girls unharmed. Brenda's whole personality changed dramatically after she returned home from her California experience. She fell into a deep depression that could not be relieved by anything, as she slept all day and refused to eat. After about a month of these depressive behaviors, Rita, during a moment of sobriety, asked Brenda on the phone if she would like to go shopping. To Rita's surprise, Brenda said yes and asked her mother if she would purchase some art supplies for her. Happy that Brenda was able to get up and go out, Rita agreed and bought Brenda an easel, paintbrushes, and a variety pack of watercolors for her to paint with. It seemed to Rita as though Brenda was on her way to recovering until one day, after school, Brenda headed upstairs in Aunt Mabel and Aunt Blair's house, and all of a sudden they heard a scream like no other. Although the two women were preparing dinner, they both dropped what they were doing and ran upstairs. They found Brenda in the corner of her room, holding her knees together, crying as she screamed, "I hate my mother, I hate my mother." And even more shocking than this scene was the fact that Brenda had splattered the new paints that her mother bought for her all over the room. This was the first of a series of depressive episodes mixed with rage that Brenda would experience way into her mid-40s. Surprisingly enough, her only vice for self-medicate was alcohol until she met Henry. Fast forward to 1980. Ruthie was 4 years old, and Brenda, who had become interested in politics, was attending a young Democratic convention to assist and support Jimmy Carter, the running Democratic candidate at the time. Although Brenda was somewhat outgoing, she tended to be shy in public places. At this point, she had been placed on lithium, the drug of choice to treat bipolar disorder in the early 1980s, and much to Aunt Blair and Aunt Mabel's relief, it seemed to give them back their beloved niece, as she was fairly consistent in her moods and kept a steady job for several years, working in the Food and Drug Administration. She was not completely free of her erratic behavior, but the rages were short-lived and not as frequent. Brenda had even become a fairly decent mother to Ruthie and Elizabeth. She sat anxiously awaiting the first speaker of the evening when in walked Henry. Henry was 7 years younger than Brenda. Several years younger than Brenda, although he had a mature way about him, causing him to present himself to be at least 10 years older than his actual age. He had long, flowing, blonde hair, parted in the middle, that was still the style that had stemmed from the discos in the 70s. He was no less than 6 feet 3 inches tall, and his figure was lean and toned. With his newly pressed shirt carelessly rolled up at the sleeves, Henry also wore his flashy bell-bottom jeans as he stood at the podium, as though he had done it 1,000 times before. Brenda was so taken by his demeanor that she hardly heard anything he said, and became lost in his deep blue eyes. For the next 6 months, he wined and dined Brenda like she'd never experienced before. It was a pleasant surprise after the horrible breakup with Kyle, due to his inability to give up his love affair with drugs. One night, Brenda decided to introduce Henry to Mary, whom Brenda knew would give her honest opinion. Much to Brenda's surprise, Mary's first response after meeting Henry was, "I don't like him. He has an angel's face, but he's shady, and something about his story doesn't add up." Mary was the only person in the world who could speak to Brenda like this. If anyone else opposed her opinion about anyone she cared about, the encounter would have ended in Brenda slamming the door in rage. However, after Mary expressed her opinion, Brenda said, "Well, okay then, I don't agree with you, but you're entitled to your opinion." After dating Henry for about 6 months, Brenda introduced him to the rest of the family, and much to her surprise, her mother, Aunt Blair, and Aunt Mabel approved. They felt he was a good influence on her because he was able to convince her to keep taking her medicine, and he also had a way of diffusing her anger so that she did not erupt on Ruthie and Elizabeth as frequently. The first time she decided to introduce him to Ruthie and Elizabeth, she went that afternoon to JCPenney's and bought them brand new dresses with matching patent leather shoes and pink ribbons for their hair. Then she delicately placed them in front of the fireplace at Aunt Mabel and Aunt Blair's house and told them a very special man was coming to meet them, so if they would be on their best behavior, she would take them the next day to Toys R Us for a treat. That night, he walked in carrying a dozen roses for Brenda and 2 all-day suckers with Mickey Mouse printed on the wrapping. Elizabeth was delighted and immediately tore into the lollipop as if it was her first meal after surviving a hostage situation. Ruthie, on the other hand, was far more cautious and politely took the lollipop, saying thank you, placing it beside her for safekeeping. It did not take long before Henry had Elizabeth on his lap, like Prince Charming had strolled into town, while Ruthie just repeated over and over, after he left, "I don't like him." This response would make Brenda angry, and it was not long before Ruthie stopped saying it aloud. And the harder Henry tried to win her over, the harder she resisted. I hope you've enjoyed this chapter of the book, and until the next chapter. I hope you got lots of tingles, 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 and I hope you're enjoying the other videos I'm posting. Please like and subscribe if you are. And as always, you can put a request of what trigger videos, that you'd like me to do. I hope you have sweet dreams, sweet dreams, sweet dreams, and I love you. Good night.